Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. Here we have fruitful conversations where we question everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today we're going to be taking a critical look at the mass psychosis of today. I mean, what the hell really is going on? This topic is was inspired by a video that Mark sent to me about. He sent it to me in January, and he asked if we could talk about it, and I said, okay, yeah. So I was just thinking of what we could talk about today, and it came to me and said, okay, so let's do that. So I posted the video on the Discord. Did you see the video? Did you watch it?
I did not have a chance to watch it. Which one was it? I might have already seen it.
I think it was from the Academy of Ideas, something on mass psychosis.
Mm.
But it's fine. I mean, we could just go off on
Yeah, I
we
know
can
I
just
know a bit about it, and I've done some research outside of this, anyways. So I
mm,
think I'll be fine.
oh, that's fine. So to me, it seems as if the world is going bonkers, right? It seems as if there is mass hysteria, both from the right and both from the left. I mean, people are just freaking out about certain things, and then you ask yourself, what's going on? Is it that the world is getting worse? Is it that things are really, 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 really getting that bad? Or is it that this is the way things have always been? I mean, every generation has what is their their own sort of hysteria. I think I was reading somewhere a while ago where even during the time of Babylonia, that they were complaining about the degeneracy at that time. Oh, that things have gotten so bad that in the olden days things were so wonderful, things were so good, and it's the exact same rhetoric that you're finding today where people think that the sky is falling. So, what do you think is going on there? What exactly is really happening? Are things really that bad? And if things are really that bad, maybe we should take it one at a time and look at where things have really gone that bad.
Well, I think what I said in your podcast yesterday with Adam Coleman still remains true. I think this is a feature of humanity. I think and what I mean by that is this the study of in-group out-group bias has been studied quite heavily, especially when you're trying to mitigate um, uh, oh good grief, mitigate harm basically, and uncertainty avoidance is the terminology used. And the best way to do that is to collectivize yourself within a group that believes the way that you do, and to stay cogent together, stay coherent together, stay together for the purpose of protection and survival, right? I think this is something that's hard baked into our DNA in the sense that psychologically speaking, we find comfort and resolve and confidence knowing that we're moving forward, having people at our back. Mass psychosis like this, or what it's called is mass formation psychosis, I think it's describing something that we already have words for, which is in group out group bias. I think it's a nice, pleasant way of making new words out of nothing. But I think the value in the discussion is still there. And then you'll have people, perhaps, hopefully, like you and I, who are, anytime somebody makes a truth claim, we're automatically like, wait a minute, is this true? I'm not sure. I need to ask some more questions. So we're a little bit more apprehensive, but we still fall prey to it. We still fall victim to the same kind of situations, which I would call a mass cognitive dissonance, right? One of the biggest things that, or one of the biggest complements of mass formation psychosis is the inability to see anything outside or acknowledge anything outside that could challenge your perceived beliefs. That's cognitive dissonance to a T, right? So I think in some parts this is a natural part of society, and we really tried. I think what we should be doing is trying to breed that that conversation around what we do here, which is question everything, right? Question everything, whether it deserves to be questioned or not, whether it's hyperbole or whether it's a tradition or established dogma. Question everything. That way we kick ourselves out of that dogastic cognitive dissonance that we're all weak to. That's what I would say.
Mm, that's quite a lot. So
It is a bit. I'm sorry.
for me, I have two approaches to this thing. So it depends on the side of me that's responding to it, right? There is the religious side of me, and there is the liberal side of me, or the rational side of me, if I'm looking at things like this, the way the world is going, right? For the rational side of me, my rational side of me tells me that this is how the world has always been. I mean, there's always been, something, every generation, there's always been something that ticks people off, and people think it's the end of the world. It's going to be the literal end of the world. And it's just business as usual, right? So in another 50 years, there's going to be something else that will come along, and people are going to go mad over and will think that this is the literal end of the world. And then there's the other side of me, the religious side of me, which who actually believes that these things are a sign of the end of the world, which actually believe that um, things have actually gotten really, really bad, and things are getting worse. However, I am not as agitated by them, by those things. And the reason why I'm not as agitated by those things is because the Bible has already predicted these things. So I'm not surprised by them. I'm not surprised that they're happening at all. It's something that I already know, right? That, okay, during this time of the end of the world, as the Bible says, certain things are going to be happening. There's going to be famine, there's going to be degeneracy, there's going to be all sorts that we see today, right? So I take comfort in that, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me apprehensive, and I just, this is, and it's very, 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 very strange to me to see Christians who are apprehensive about things like this, but because they should know better. They should know that. I mean, if you already know something is going to happen, should you be that worked up about it, right? You shouldn't be that worked up about it. So those are the two parts of me. Those are the two ways in which I look at something like this, and I'm able to make sense of it. So Stanley, welcome to the conversation. So let me just give you a background of what you were talking about. So
Hey,
the
sorry I'm
background,
late.
no problem. The background is, when you look at the world today, it seems as if everything is going to shit. It seems as if there is the world is coming to an end. Everything is getting worse in certain quarters, both in the right and the left. They're claiming this is the literal end of the world. So my question is, are we witnessing a mass psychosis, in the sense that are we witnessing an over exaggeration of the way things normally were, the way things normally are, right? Is it, I mean, it can be possible that every generation always have their issues, and they try to catastrophize is to think that this is the worst it's ever been, right? I mean, imagine people who were in World War II or World War I, and compare them to now, right? Or are things really, 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 really getting that bad that we should be worried that things are getting that bad objectively? That's the that's where we are currently.
Um, I'm a big skeptic of the video. Jordan Peterson narrated it, right?
Well,
You didn't recognize? No, seriously, that you didn't recognize it?
nope,
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad I didn't
nope.
see it.
Narrated what?
Well, no, 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 no. I'm not being pejorative. I actually, because he sounded a lot younger. I didn't recognize his voice, but he's got a very distinctive pattern of
Yeah.
speaking.
No, it wasn't. It
So
wasn't Jordan Peterson. No,
it
it
wasn't.
wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Wow.
It wasn't. Yeah,
Okay,
it
but
wasn't.
anyway, I'm not convinced, and I don't think we're going through a current mass psychosis. But I'm also not anywhere near a psychologist. That's not me. I think in the information age that we live in now, there's just too many ways to educate yourself to really fall into a mass psychosis. I just don't, you know, go back to the 1800s or, farther back where information didn't flow. Well, let's go back before the telegraph, before, you know, everything that you knew, say, if you were living in Spain, your priest told you. People were a lot more aligned as to, background and way of thinking and all that stuff. If anything, America in particular is again, I'm not a psychologist. I have zero expertise. This is just all me thinking, no expertise, zero. I think America, in other places like America, where there is kind of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, a million different ways to look up or read about or familiarize yourself with an issue. I don't think mass psychosis is that. I don't think, I'm not saying it can't happen. I think that the West in particular is particularly immune to mass psychosis. If you're into mass psychosis, it's going to be fairly limited. I think even Germany, the examples in the video that were used, I don't think Germany was the product of mass psychosis.
Oh, I
Now,
absolutely disagree with that. But yeah,
okay,
go
well,
on.
I'm not
No,
a
go on.
I'm not a psychologist. If you disagree, you disagree. I can't argue the point. But I think Germany was particularly well educated, and they voted Hitler into office.
I don't
Yeah.
think that the
So
mass majority of the population was that well educated.
Germany was one of the better educated countries in Europe,
Well, true. That could be possibly
and
true,
it
but
was after the
I think
telegraph.
sure, but that we have cell phones and we have the entirety of human knowledge at our fingertips with cell phones, yet we still have the same problem. The problem isn't information, the problem is humans.
Well, see, I thoroughly disagree that it's mass psychosis. To be honest, now, Steve, you and I are just going to have to agree to disagree. I think mass psychosis in 2023 is a cop out. I do not see mass psychosis as a thing. We are giving ourselves excuses. I will agree that we are humans and we are prone to rationalize, you know, um, whatever it is we decide to rationalize. But mass psychosis as an actual diagnosis of 2023 America or pretty much anywhere, you're more prone to it if there's censorship, like maybe China or somewhere does, where you control Iran, you control the flow of information. But mass psychosis in the United States, not hardly.
okay,
Ignorance is
so
probably a better
uh,
a better term.
yeah, ignorance can be a gateway to mass psychosis. But so
I don't
this is where
agree with mass
this is
psychosis.
where this is where I will counter you, right? I think you are looking at it through your own experiences, and you are almost thinking that because this is true for you, because you can um, search out information, because you can reach out to certain things, then that has to be true for the majority of people. Unfortunately, that's not true. Most people don't even read. Most people are not analytical. Most people are just like their ancestors 100 years ago. Most people are still not literally, but they still, in quote, get their information from the priest, right? The priest these days can be the politician or the political party that they align with. The priest can be the ideology that they align with, right? And um, they just hold on to certain information, right? And they think that's what it's right. Okay, let's use an example for let's say a few years back, we were told that we had how many years left for before climate change and before the whole world is subsumed underwater, right? That was climate alarmism. Now we also have the alarmism of oh the alarmism of the you know of the right. There's so many things going on the right now that you think that the world is falling, right? With the CRT stuff and all those things. That is, for me, that is mass psychosis.
Well, let me
So
ask you a question.
there are pockets of it specifically to certain ideologies or to certain areas, right? But if you take these things as subsets, then you will see that almost every sector, right, has a semblance or has a tiny bit of this happening within itself.
Well,
Um,
can I
Go ahead,
interject here
Steve.
real quick?
Sure, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, so some of the benchmarks of what would be considered mass formation psychosis is one is like a hypnotic state, right? Another is the shared narrative. So if you have an entire population that has a shared narrative, like, oh, the Jews are the ones making us poor, or conservatives are endangering our
Excuse
lives,
me.
or the left is full of race baiters, right? You have a shared narrative with these individuals. And then you have an emotional intensity associated with that. So that means you're really, really passionate about the thing that you're talking about that all your friends agree with you on, right? Then I would say the second to last thing would be a group identity. I'm a lefty. I'm a conservative. I'm a libertarian. Like these are trademark, hallmark aspects of what mass formation psychosis is. And the last one is a resistance to alternative viewpoints. This is where that cognitive dissonance comes in, right? So these are aspects of what people assume to be mass formation psychosis is. Now, despite the fact that academically mass formation psychosis isn't supported, you can still see the remnants and the trademarks and hallmarks of what it could be. We just haven't studied it yet. But these are absolutely the most agreed upon aspects and hallmarks of what mass formation psychosis is.
Okay, first off, um, you said entire population. That doesn't describe the United States. It's a 50-50 bifurcation. So
Did I
that
say
kind of
entire
just
population?
let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay.
50% of the American voting population doesn't agree with each other. That's not mass psychosis.
Well, no, no,
And
no, 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 no,
a
no.
couple other
Okay.
things. Well, actually, that's my main point. And then I was going to be facetious and go as MAGA mass psychosis, but I'll hold on to that for now. But
Trump derangement syndrome.
you used, well, no, that's the 50% that's non-MAGA. Um, Hence my point. Can you have a mass psychosis that's bifurcated?
Absolutely. If you have 50% of a population,
Based
that's a
on what,
massive amount
Steve?
of people.
That doesn't even make sense as a
It sure does.
diagnosis of mass psychosis.
It absolutely does, because the mass psychosis, right? Again, remember, a shared narrative, right?
The entire
Emotional intensity, a
population,
passionate,
you
patriotism. I
literally
didn't
said
say
it.
the entire population.
Yes, you
I said
did.
the group. If I did say the entire population, I misspoke. I meant to say the group that you're
Darn it. I was
associated
hoping to
with.
pin you down on that.
So if I misspoke, you've called me out correctly. But what my intent was to explain the specific. So if you have 50%, and this is pretty much what it is, 50% of the population votes for conservative, 50% vote for Democrats or liberals, and that's debatable. But let's just make it simple, right? You have a small inset group in the middle that decides the outcome of the entire voting process. But emotional intensity, remember, emotional intensity. Conservatives are highly emotionally sensitive to their conservative and their Christian beliefs. The left is equally so about their liberal values, about their progressive values. So what you have is you have two competing mass formation psychoses competing against each other. That's why it's so hard to get through to individuals.
I can only shake my head that I don't agree.
Stanley, you need to get out more, I think.
No, you know what? At this point, there is nothing you just said, Steve, that remotely suggests mass psychosis. Okay, if you've got a 50-50, we really don't know who's going to win the 2024 election. It's not mass psychosis, that's democracy.
Vote
That's
blue no
In
matter
that's
who.
that's not the
technically,
that's not the point. The
Vote
point the
blue no
point
matter
what
is
is the
who.
point?
exactly the point is the sort of emotional investment, the uncritical nature of looking at the other side. I mean, the holding on to certain viewpoints that are so, I don't know how to put this, but holding on to certain viewpoints that are irrational, almost to the point of irrationality, right? And fear mongering and alarmism, right? And this is something that you find both on the right and on the left. So it's not one side doing it. For example, okay, so there was an example on Twitter today where someone was literally comparing the ban on there was a ban on drag queens in one of the states, and he said that
Probably
in
several of
Nazi
them by
Germany,
now.
he said in Nazi Germany that drag queens were dragged out and they were killed, and a similar thing is happening in Republican states in the U.S. right now. I mean, that kind of um,
That's not mass
hyperbole, but
psychosis.
it's not being hyperbolic in the sense of being hyperbolic. It's almost making it seem literal, and
Not
there are
in
thousands
their
of people
point of view.
agreeing with him, right? This is not a French point of view. This is something that you see a lot of people, especially on Twitter. We can argue that Twitter is not the real world, but there's a lot of conversations that go on around there, and it sets the pace for some things that happen in the real world. So I see that as an example of a mass psychosis. Yeah, I do see it as an example.
Well, two things. Number one, um, it's not just a Republican thing or a conservative thing. Um, I guarantee you that possibly now again, I'm pulling numbers out. I have no proof. It's a rhetorical argument. I think it's probably more than 50% of American adults or American parents who would pretty much agree that drag queen story hour is just a tad too far. Okay, that's not a 50-50. It's probably a little bit more than that. I don't see the mass psychosis in something like that. The other thing in the video specifically, where's the totalitarianism? Even in with a January 6th sort of scenario, by hook or by crook or by design, there were checks and balances. We may talk about authoritarianism in the United States, but totalitarianism isn't exactly authoritarianism. One of the main features of or the result of a mass psychosis, or maybe you'll have to remind me of a main contributor or a stir up the pot sort of thing is totalitarianism. That's not in America yet. So, can
Okay,
you
so
have mass psychosis without some element of totalitarianism?
I think it would have been very, very good if we can have Mark here because he sent the video that's stimulated this conversation, and his device is still having issues connecting. But
So,
he's made his points, and I think I'll just be posting his
Okay,
points. People can respond to it. So he's saying the point of the psychosis presentation was not about America today. So okay, let's say it's not about America today. Let's remove that element from the conversation. Say it's about how people can become vulnerable to totalitarian messages, which is kind of similar to what we're talking about, right? Where you're uncritical about something, you think the other side is, just wrong, and there's no conversation to be had about it.
even well, Mark's bringing up climate change. 50% of the country doesn't believe in climate change. The Green New Deal is not taking over America in some mass psychosis wave. There was no red
well,
wave, there was no blue wave. I simply don't see the evidence, even Mark, with climate change. Climate
well, let me
change
let me
isn't taking over America.
let me add something here. So again, mass psychosis doesn't need to happen to the entirety of the population, but at least a large majority of the population.
Can you
So
can you give
here's
me
my
that
point. Here's
reference?
my point. See what happens when a conservative questions other conservative leadership, and vice versa. What happens when a lefty questions the Democratic Party? You'll see an absolute all-out attack on that individual.
That's
Like,
not
you
mass
aren't representing.
psychosis.
It absolutely is a presentation of mass formation psychosis, because
Nope.
what you are doing is you are questioning the shared vision and perspective of the group to which you belong. Anything that criticizes that group, again, take a look back at that hypnotic state of the shared narrative. If you are questioning that shared narrative, you will be struggled against.
Who's in
This
a
is a
hypnotic
component.
state specifically?
If you are highly suggestive, you are in a hypnotic state. If your leadership tells you this is what we believe, this is what we believe, this is what we believe, and you go along with it without being critical, I would contend that you are in a hypnotic state because you are
Name
incapable of saying
me.
no.
Can you cite an example in the United States specifically?
Absolutely, and I'll give you this one. If I go into a left-leaning room, which I have done, and I say, I don't agree with what you are thinking and what you are arguing, I get attacked en masse in whatever room I go into.
That's one room, Steve.
No, no, no.
That's
It's
not mass
every room I
psychosis.
go
That's
into,
that's
Stanley.
room psychosis.
It's every place that I go into, and I can't go into the details about how I can, because I would have to out myself and my specific lifestyle if I was to go into this. But my lifestyle leans heavily into the left, heavily, heavily, heavily into the left. I mean, further left than most people are comfortable admitting. So if I go in, and like I made a post today, I said something along the lines of our community presents itself to be non-authoritarianistic, but just go ahead and make a truth claim that is contrary to our popular belief, and see if you don't absolutely get ribbed for it by every single fucking person. And exactly what I said happened, and exactly what I said would happen happened exactly the way that I said it would. So this is what I mean. You can go forward and make a really easy example. Charles has been a victim of this recently, where he's obviously a conservative. I would say a more left-leaning conservative at this point, but he's a conservative, goes into these various rooms, or even on Twitter makes a statement that is in direct violation of what the conservative environment or strata believes in, and he gets crucified. It's happened to him enough that we wrote an article about it.
Okay. I just I don't think what you're describing is. I think what you're describing is partisanship. I don't think it's mass psychosis.
It's possible,
Yes.
but I'll
Can
let
you
Charles answer that.
take Mark's question? Mark had asked the question, and I've put it on the screen. So
What is your view? It's that groups of people cannot. Okay, well, why does mass psychosis have to be a false narrative? What if it's not a false narrative? What if it's a truth? Is that mass? If a mass of people, say in the 1600s, were decided that we are Catholics and we're going to fight a crusade against, whatever, and actually it's earlier than the 1600s. If they think that Christianity is a true religion, is that mass psychosis? Why is a
hi Ben,
mass
welcome to the
why is
conversation.
mass
Let's go ahead.
psychosis dependent on a false narrative?
Hey, Stanley.
Hey, how you doing, Ben?
Pretty good. And by the way, I mean, I think there's room to, like what you just said, I kind of agree with if you look at religion, mass psychosis, is it related? Maybe. Could be.
Well, for the
A lot of
for the
people won't agree with that, but I might at least
well
start
for
to
the
agree with you.
doubters among us, what is a bigger mass psychosis than religion?
Right. Well, and I think that
Sorry,
what it
Charles.
seems like we're getting to is really just whether we call it mass psychosis, which sounds like kind of like almost a more like technical, technical psychological term. I agree with what you're talking about partisanship, but I think it is more than just that. I think that what we're talking about in general is just how people kind of form their minds around the way that the world is. And there's this, I'll use another psychological term, cognitive dissonance that we get when somebody else sees the world a different way, and it, because they believe in it, in a different way, it throws into question what I believe. And then it's like, oh, well, I feel like I need to preemptively attack this other viewpoint because it's throwing my viewpoint into question. And I, and that's not true because what I believe is true, right?
That's an interesting point. And this is that if you truly believe in what you believe, how is a counterpoint going to shake your faith in whatever it is you believe?
It's not supposed to, but that's what's happening. That's the point of the conversation. It's not supposed to, but that is what is happening.
What's up, Ben?
Okay, well, I'll
Hey,
stop there
Steve.
and let somebody
Hey,
else talk.
Charles.
But if you truly believe in
Hey
something,
Ben.
a counterpoint.
Well, who was it? I think his last name is Haidt. He's a
Jonathan
psychologist, or no,
Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt talks about this. He talks about, what is it? The elephant and its driver. And the idea
Yeah.
is that there's the person on top of the elephant who's just this little guy who's trying to get the elephant to go the way that he wants. But ultimately, if that elephant decides, nah, I'm not into it, I mean, there's really nothing that the driver can do about it. And the reason that I
He can
bring this
hop
up
on.
is, well, in this, I see
That's
what you're
right.
saying.
Good luck with that one.
In what I'm saying is just this. If your ego is the elephant and you're more, kind of like forebrain or whatever, your
Frontal cortex.
your frontal cortex is what is supposed to make the decisions. This is why we make so many of our, decisions based off of emotion, based off of really reactionarily making our decisions rather than proactively making our decisions. It's just that, there's something about it that, like, the lowest common denominator is not our ability to think for ourselves. It's the need to do something when we feel threatened or that kind of thing. And I think that that's really what it's getting to. I think that the only way that you can fight that kind of a thing ultimately is to have the kind of society that we have, which is where I will again agree with you, Stanley. I think that the West is in a better position than many other places simply because it has decided to adopt a view that we want to have different voices in the room, and we do at least nominally say we want to have different ways of thinking promoted, so that we can kind of touch all the bases and get a full understanding of the different possibilities. um,
So
Well, my
I
question
think
is,
Ben,
how can
I
go
think
ahead?
I sorry Stanley. I think I disagree with the almost the last part of your statement where you say that the West is in the best position to somewhat guard against mass psychosis. I think fundamentally that this mass psychosis is even a product of the liberalism, the extreme liberalism of the West.
okay,
No,
sorry, go ahead.
you might shake your head, but that is the truth, right? Because
Ah.
you know, in many other parts of the world, people are still very very much grounded in reality, and I don't think that people are grounded so much in reality in many parts of the West, right? So
May I make a
people,
fine distinction, Charles?
yeah, please do.
Okay. So the fine distinction that I would make is I understand what you're saying. And I think that there is a difference between the West writ large and the technophile generation of Westerners who are spending most of their time on social media and online. In other words, when we talk about the West, we're talking about everybody, including everybody who's not in the hive, who isn't part of those echo chambers to that degree. Now, they're all still part of their same echo chambers. Take a Southern Baptist or just a, Northern Baptist, where I grew up, church, and you will see that. Like, that is still very much a thing. This is something that, again, Stanley and I kind of agree on. There's always going to be a bubble. But I think that where you are kind of pointing at is the bubble that is like super conscious of things that are going on online, things that are of the moment, the Twitter, kind of area, all of that kind of stuff. And I don't think that we can. The fine distinction is I don't think we should call everybody in the West representative by that very vocal minority. And I would actually say that I think Steve was onto this earlier. It is a vocal minority on both sides of the aisle who are most pushing this stuff. And I mentioned in the comments something called accelerationism, something I don't know a lot about, but which I have seen around on the internet. And it is basically just this. It's the idea that people on an extreme political persuasion believe that the only way that they can get their political views into the mainstream is by causing the mainstream to become so irreversibly damaged and to cause such a problem with the discussion that it all goes to hell in a handbasket, and the only people who are left are the people who are either on the extreme one way or the other. This is true for people who are white supremacists. It's true for people who, I don't know, are communist, revolutionaries. It's really the same thing on either side. They are actually, and I actually think that what we might be seeing is these separate groups colluding in a way, not by their own initiative, but because they're able to generate. It's so easy for some right winger to generate something that is like left wing propaganda that is so far out that everybody is like, oh my God, the left people are crazy. And it's like, yeah, but it was a guy from the right who created it because he knows exactly how to use their language to, create that. And it's the exact same thing the other side. Leftists know exactly what drives you know, you know, what drives, conservative Bible thumping, Second Amendment gun toting people. And I just think that what's happened is it's become so confused now. There's probably literally groups of right wing activists who are doing false flag, left wing propaganda, and the same thing's probably happening on the right. And I think that's what we're seeing. And the only way to get out of it is to just kind of step back from this view of the web and everything that's Western, on the web, and kind of just look at what it's like in your neighborhood and with the people that are around you. But that makes it difficult for someone who's in Nigeria, though, because then all you see is this. Anyway, I'm going to stand down now.
Here's another great point. So, and seeing that this is so relevant to the present, mass formation psychosis could also be along the lines of exactly what you're seeing with Scott Adams, right? So you've got a huge swath of people who agree with Scott. Why? Again, why? Shared narrative, emotional intensity, group identity, and resistance to alternative viewpoints.
Okay.
All of those things are included in that whole situation where what he's doing is he's questioning a group narrative, and he's got a group of people that are following him who believe the same things that he does, that have an emotional intensity attached to what he's speaking, right? We see this with pitchforks and torches in stories around the world of villagers coming together to hunt down the beast. I mean, this is one of the biggest narratives of the Beauty and the Beast story. We see this throughout history, Stanley. Throughout history, we repeatedly see this mass formation psychosis going on, and anybody who questions it to the otherwise is immediately demonized.
That's not mass psychosis. That's mass ignorance.
It's mass hysteria.
They aren't necessarily the same thing.
That's a how will you put it? That's a
semantic
Adams. Point. That's a semantic
numbers
point. In that poll.
Sorry, Stanley. Sorry, I'm very sorry. But let me just get this in before I forget. I want to respond to Ben. So Ben, isn't it the proof of what I'm saying? If someone on the left can manufacture something because he knows it will trigger the right, and it so easily triggers the right, and someone on the right can do the same thing to the left, isn't that proof of what I'm saying, right? So this is not even real, this is something manufactured, but it gets people really going. Now the second point I was trying, you can respond to both together. The second point is that, yeah, you may say these voices are the minority voices, but are these not the voices who are pushing legislation? Are these not the voices who are shaping certain things, right? That may take the country in a certain direction. So they might be minority, but their impact, they have an oversized influence in how things would run in a couple of years. So you can't just dismiss them and say they are a vocal minority. Those are the 2 points I want you to address. Then Stanley can go on.
Yeah, no, I agree with your first point. That point is well taken. The second point also, I think, is well, it's very sobering. I think you're right on that one too. But this is also again why I don't know. What I'm really hoping for is that we've been able to live our lives fairly well, even with all of the roadblocks that we have in our way. Whether those be political leaders or group leaders trying to cause issues, or media, not necessarily because of partisanship, but because of driving interest by people rage click on things. My hope is that this is kind of a growing experience that we have, because if we think about it, people haven't been used to this level of technology before. Like, we've never in the history of the world, so far as we understand, we've never had anything like this before. And so really what it means is that people have to learn how to self-filter things. They have to learn how to be like, I've heard this guy say this before, and the kinds of people who agree with him, I don't like. So maybe, yeah, that's not great. That can be a double-edged sword. But on the other hand, like, I got to do what I got to do. And people are kind of figuring out little ways to the nuances of these things. And my hope is that, number one, if we can keep a common core of people who are able to just talk about things, that that the people who are interested in actually electing the government will be drawn more to that. But on the other hand, I don't have a huge amount of hope for that, because from what I've seen, um, part of the actual like really fundamental problem with American politics is that, and this is just my experience, but I have to work really hard in order to do well, and everybody here does, and so we're focused on that, and so the things like politics only come up every once in a while. We're not very engaged most of the time with our politics, um, which is on one hand good, because if everyone was engaged in politics all the time, nothing would get done. um, but on the other hand, having your head in the sand like the ostrich is also not a very good thing, and to Stanley's point, might be a little closer to World War II Germany than I would be comfortable with. People do need to keep their wits about them, and keep an eye on the things that are happening around them, to forestall tyranny. So I don't know. Anyway, I should step back.
Well, to go back to Charles's critique of me, um, maybe not just me, but more people need to get out more. I think Scott Adams should get out more. You know, if you're well, I won't even go there. Get out more. There is a huge danger, and I've got a 16-year-old. Sometimes, my parents used to fuss at me. You need to go outside. I don't care what you do, just don't come back till till whenever. Um, that if there's a way to be mass psychosisized, it's gonna be, staring at a computer screen, on Twitter or whatever it is. There are books, there are people, there's grass to mow, there are fish to catch, there are things to do, and
Because so
I don't buy the premise of mass psychosis, though.
so Stanley, maybe let me take this conversation somewhere else for a little bit. So I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned something earlier in the chat about Africa being having more fundamentalist Christians. So I wanted to get
Me?
your ideas. Yeah, 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 yeah. When we're talking about the religious,
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
okay.
So
Well, I mean,
what in your opinion is a fundamental Christian?
well, I don't mean fundamentalist in the usual way it's used.
Hmm.
I mean it more true believers, faithful, not
Okay, okay.
overboard. And the
Hmm.
reason I say this is for the Catholic Church in particular, South and Central America and Africa in particular is like the largest growing segment of Catholicism in the world. So when I say fundamentalist, I really mean true believers. Now,
Okay.
I don't mean like true believers. Fundamentals is how I was using the word. And if you thought I meant something else, I apologize.
No, no, no. It's not.
But
It's
it's
not
amazing.
something to be offended
The
about. But I
church,
think I like your clarification, right?
the
Because,
church
uh,
that I grew up in, when
mm,
I grew up Catholic, in my church is, if it's not the oldest, it's one of the oldest Black Catholic parishes in the country. We have, I think, the last two priests have been African priests, which is a big change because when I was growing up, the priests were either Irish or Irish American. There's a big Franciscan, Irish kind of presence in the Black community in Savannah. So, we've had wonderful African priests, strong, fundamental, true believers. And I'm not that, but I admire it, and appreciate it, frankly.
all right. clarification noted. So it wasn't a point to. I wasn't offended by any of it. I just I wanted to I wanted to take you up on it and tell you that from the way I understood it, probably America had more of the fundamentalist Christians than even
Well,
than even
fundamental.
Africa or
I didn't
um,
mean. I
the
didn't
way.
mean in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. So
I meant like
it's no big deal.
Catholics.
No big deal. Yeah.
Salt of the earth.
So back to the conversation. Where were we? Where were we? I'm still. Mark is still trying to come in. I don't know. I don't know. It would have been very, very good to have had him come here. Anyhow,
Can you support
as
5 people on this, or is he not available now?
his device is not
5
connected.
minutes.
His device is
Mm.
not. The browser is not
What
recognizing
is
his mic and cam.
the mass psychosis in America and the West may be you know, is conspiracy theory? Is that mass psychosis? Because
Could
that's
be.
what it said.
Well, I would think that, well, so that's actually an interesting thing to think about though, right? So like what if everybody sees like a UFO or something, right? Like I don't know. Even today, Stanley, like it's been in the news recently, right? Like, whether it's an actual air like a balloon that came from another country, kind of thing, which is technically a UFO, or whether it's something that's more along the woo, kind of Area 51 UFO thing. Like that's something that I feel is not really open. It's open to derision and to discussion at the same time, and in probably equal measure now, as opposed to before where it wasn't equal measure. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I guess
Yeah, I
what I'm
do.
wondering is, yeah. So I guess what I'm wondering is how do we like my own parents? My own parents have views which I consider to be um, very strange, very strange views. They're in line with a lot of the stuff that MAGA people believe. Um, and I struggle because the thing is, they will not accept basically any kind of standard or authenticity that most people would accept. So, for example, the World Health Organization or the IMF or even I don't know, Fox News, MSNBC, whatever you want to call it. They basically don't believe that any of that is real or any of it is true. They've become so turned off to it all because it either is so far away from their values or so far away from uh, the way that they believe the world ought to be. And on top of that, they are now, kind of believing that actually the more kind of niche a source of information is, the more likely it is to actually be like a true leak,
Interesting.
that, oh, the government hasn't, corrupted this small, group of, people yet. And it's like, I don't know, when I'm talking with them, it's very difficult because on one hand, I know that they are very good people. They are the kind of people sorry, not Ed, literally any one of you, if you were to come, and stop by my house, they would offer you to come and, have some food, have some water. If you need somewhere to sleep because something, has happened with your car or something, we've got a place to set you up. They're those kinds of people. Um, but they are also the other thing, and it's very difficult to kind of take both of those things in stride at the same time.
Well, I'm going to go in an odd direction. Um, your parents are older than me.
Hmm.
Let them have their quirks.
Well, that's where I'm at, to be honest
They're
with you,
not hurting
Stanley, because I
anybody.
I'm I only have me. Well, I'm not going to put an expiration date on our relationship, but suffice it to say that I probably have a limited. I know that I am limited by the amount of time that I will have with my parents, and
Right.
so
And
it is not
I'm
a.
in the same situation. Sometimes I'll tell you a story because it's a different topic, but 30, 40 years ago, I'd have just gone, he's being an a-hole. You know what I thought? Oh, what a charming old man. and
Yeah,
then,
yeah,
and then let's
yeah,
and then let's move on. But I
yep,
also want to make
yep.
one more point. I oddly enough don't think UFO people are conspiracy theorists.
Hmm.
I don't, I tend to look at conspiracy theories to be more like socio-economic, maybe cultural. UFOs, that's Star Trek.
Ah, well, so this is a good question though, right? So like, is the mass hysteria coming from people who really just want to have a narrative that means that they're important or that their lives have value, right? Like I think that's something that's really true, don't you? Um,
No, I don't. I
yeah, but
don't.
if you have you like have you really been in like I will say that I have not been as downtrodden as many of the people that I've been around in life.
I've
Some
been
people they have
downtrodden.
what's that?
Sure, I have. Everyone gets there unless you're like ultra rich. But
Yeah, no, but
here's
but
here's my
I'm not
point.
just talking about bad luck. I'm not just talking about a rough couple years. I mean for your entire life, all that you have known is privation and a struggle, and you basically never got anything in life. There are people out there like that, and they are the ones who are the most susceptible to this because anything that gives them
But let
something
me
more.
let me propose something to you. Those are the people who are not on Fox News being crazy.
Mhm.
Those aren't
No, but they're
that's not
probably the people
that's
who are
not
shooting up
that
places.
being truly downtrodden and maybe downtrodden to a point where you're a little paranoid. That's not
Yeah.
mass psychosis, that's trauma. There's a difference.
Well, strangely enough, let me describe this. Is one of the symptoms of psychosis is
Okay,
delusions,
we're talking mass
hallucinations,
psychosis. They aren't the same thing.
incoherent speech, sleep problems, social withdrawal, mental illness, even schizophrenia, major
You're
depression, trauma.
nope.
Like all these things
Hey,
are
hey, hey, Steve, why
components
are you
of
describing the
psychosis.
left? Hey, 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 Steve, why are you describing the left?
I'm, I'm not just describing the left. My
Okay,
point,
let me
Stanley,
put it
my
to you
point, hold
this
on, let
way.
me finish my
You
point.
hopped from
Psychosis
individual
is in the
symptoms.
name of mass formation psychosis. These are symptoms
Dude,
of psychosis.
your framing
Here's
is
the other
incorrect.
aspect. It's not, and I'll get to it. Give me a second. What
We're
happened for
just
the
kidding, guys.
last 3 years? People were forced to be in their house,
Nope.
separated and segregated from society,
Nope.
incapable of interacting with other people. I'm
Nope.
sorry, but this is one of the classical ways, and this has been studied in
Steve, don't
psychology as
let me
well.
be mean.
If you want to create a situation in which people will do whatever you tell them to, the best way to do that is to make a reward system. That
And
reward
look
system
what
is
happened.
if you want to go outside, you have to get vaccinated.
What happened is
This is
the
so crystal clear to me.
what you know what you're describing is conspiracy theory and you're espousing it.
It's
What
not.
happened in America during the COVID is a total fracturing of American society, the exact opposite of mass psychosis. Everybody factionalized, they fractured. We have the opposite of mass psychosis.
I will take your opinion and I
Not an
accept your
opinion.
perspective here.
Watch the news.
However, there's a different alternative side to this, which is what happens when you force people to stay in their house and not socialize. Human beings are
Steve,
social
I'm going to go
creatures.
back to my point.
Not
What
done
was
yet.
the
Hold on.
end result? Is the country
end-
more fractured before or after COVID?
You saw this clearly, Stanley. And it's
Answer
called the
my question,
BLM
please.
riots.
Are we more unified
People
in
were
a
just
mass psychosis
absolutely
way, or are we
tired.
less?
People were
Stanley,
absolutely tired of being stuck in their houses, being told they can't
Steve.
leave. And then they got to go out and fuck shit up. And they were happy to do so. If it wasn't for the
Steve.
pandemic, those riots would not have happened.
Steve, are we
Stanley,
more unified or less unified than we were before March of 2020? My contention is we are way more fractionalized, or whatever the word is, than we were 3 years ago.
I would
The
say
proof-
bifurcated.
The proof is in the pudding. You can
but-
proselytize, you can theorize.
Stanley,
The
the
result
point,
is a more fractionated country, not mass
I disagree.
psychosis.
Stanley, the point is not that everyone is having this psychosis in the same manner. The point is that
Well, then
even
it's
in the-
not
Correct.
mass psychosis.
Let me finish.
It can
let me
be
finish.
mass psychosis if
Let
it's
me finish.
50% of the population,
Even-
Stanley.
I disagree.
Stanley, let me finish.
Provide me the documentation, Steve,
Stanley,
because I
let me finish.
simply don't
The
believe you.
point is within pockets themselves, right? It seems as if every sphere is having their own type of mass psychosis.
Well, that's not
So
mass
you see-
psychosis.
But that's what we're talking about. This
Literally,
is a
it's
semantic
not.
disagreement.
Mass
This is a
psychosis doesn't have to be 100% of the
disagreement.
population.
Okay, so mass psychosis can be regional?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Actually, yes. That's
Absolutely.
yeah. That's actually kind of.
So
I think
it
one
has
of
to
the
involve the whole world. So what number?
Yeah.
What number is okay for it to be mass psychosis?
That's not mass
Is it
psychosis.
at the country level, or is it at?
that's such a child
Mass-
question, by the way.
mass 50 different mass psychoses? That doesn't even make sense.
It does.
In the
doesn't
US,
make-
you're
Okay,
telling
so-
me that there's 50 different mass psychoses.
Let's look at the COVID business, for example. Now, for the left, it was a psychosis in the sense. Let me finish in the sense that if you're not even putting on a mask, some people are going to have such a visceral reaction to you for not putting on a mask, right? On the right, they think that the vaccine is some evil plot to kill people,
Politics.
to whether it's you. I don't care about the origins of it. I'm telling you how it's affecting people.
No, I'm saying it is politics.
This is how it was
That
affecting
is
people. You can see the
not
reactions on both
psychosis.
sides were irrational, both irrational reactions, right? And that's what we're talking about. It's not as if everybody has to go in the same direction. No. But it's just that in these pockets, in this sphere, you see that sort of mass hysteria. In this other sphere, you're seeing the same a different sort of mass hysteria. And every group or every pocket of ideology or something has its own mass hysteria at this
No.
particular point in time. That's the point I'm driving.
No, you're talking ideology, not psychosis.
Just because it's an ideology does not dismiss its ability to be mass formation psychosis.
And just because it's ideology doesn't mean it is psychosis.
Sure. That's an agreeable dissension for me. I'm okay with saying that.
And I'm
But
saying
the opposite can
ideology-
also be true, which you are denying the possibility of.
ideology can be mass psychosis, I guess, but mass psychosis can't be ideology.
But see, this is the problem that I have with this conversation, is because mass, this is an equivocation where we're taking one word and using it in two different ways, but assuming that it's only to be used in one way. Right? Mass just means a large group. So a large group
what about
could be the
mass
entire
shootings?
conservative
Mass
party.
shootings are technically right now being considered, what is it,
Oh
3 or more
no, they
people?
can't
Would
be
you
mass shootings.
consider-
Everyone is not involved. Everyone wasn't killed.
That's right. That's right. And this is a
Would
shooting
you
war
con-
with 360 million people. It's not a mass shooting.
Would you consider college football, like Georgia versus Florida, would you consider that mass psychosis?
Only
BYU
if it is
versus Utah?
based.
Is
Only
that
if it
mass
is.
psychosis? It's a football
Only if
game.
it. Only
Stanley,
I
if
wanna hear
it
what Ben
It's
has to
states
say.
that
fandom.
something is true, which is categorically false. Okay, so if they all believed, like the Mandela effect, right? If they all believed something was true that simply wasn't and was verifiably not true by everybody else from the outside, and they still believe it, and it's like a linchpin of what holds their group together, I would say that is like formation mass psychosis, right?
Which is the definition of cognitive dissonance.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So yeah, well, in any
Well, when
case,
you're incapable of taking outside facts to dispute your position, that's cognitive dissonance. That's the
Cognitive
definition of cognitive
dissonance
dissonance.
is seeing the evidence and thinking the opposite of what the
No.
evidence is showing. That's
No, it's
not
not.
mass psychosis necessarily.
No, that is not the definition of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive
Look it
dissonance,
up.
and I'll bring it up here. Okay, I'll bring it up. Cognitive dissonance.
I love definitions. This is my favorite
Right?
part.
The state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change.
Right. So
Meaning you can believe something that is not true, and when someone confronts you with evidence to the contrary, you still dispute the evidence to the contrary. That's exactly what Ben is discussing.
Okay, but that's not mass psychosis.
It is a component of mass psychosis.
Man, we are having trouble with the jacuzzis versus the whirlpools here.
Because shared narrative, emotional intensity, group identity, and resistance to alternative viewpoints. Number 5, resistance to alternative viewpoints is cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
Cognitive dissonance is a
And
component of
cognitive
mass.
Okay,
mass formation
I will
psychosis.
Let me
accept
get
that.
Stanley to agree to mass
Cognitive
psychosis now.
dissonance is not mass psychosis.
Stanley, do you
They're
think
two
MAGA
different things.
was mass psychosis? Do you think MAGA was mass psychosis?
No, I don't.
This is a
I do.
preemptive. This
Yeah,
is a
me too.
preemptive no. But Stanley,
Nope.
on that condition, Stanley would have argued that MAGA is a mass psychosis.
It's not.
As is Trump derangement syndrome.
It is,
Exactly.
dude. Maybe I just do politics. Ideology is not mass psychology. Mass psychosis.
I think there's a possibility
MAGA
that it could
is
be.
Okay,
not.
well, hold on.
MAGA
Of course,
is
they're
kind
not
of
literally
define
the
this,
same
though.
thing, but one can be the basis for ideology can be a basis for mass psychosis. We're not saying
It
they are the same
can.
thing. Yes. So that's the point we're driving at.
Not one of these things in particular
Okay, well,
leads
I
to
wanna
it. It's
make-
a
I wanna
component.
make sure I
It's a
understand.
component aspect, right? So if you have mass psychosis, mass formation psychosis, you have aspects that reach into all of these other different things, right? Mass psychosis can't be defined by one of them, otherwise you're committing a compositional fallacy. They have to be
Okay.
components of all, right? So you
Well-
have to have all of these different components to be
Well, let me
considered mass
respond.
formation psychosis.
Is ideology a bunch of people believing in an ideology? Is that mass psychosis?
No, it would.
Okay.
No.
It would
Then
only
we can
be.
stop
It's
there.
a component.
okay, good,
We can
good.
stop there.
Good.
MAGA is ideology. It is not mass psychosis.
No.
Unless
Yes. Hold on.
it
Yes.
shares the perspectives of mass psychosis as a
So
formation.
you're saying that every MAGA person, all 74
No.
million
Nope.
of them,
No,
are
no, no, no.
crazy?
No.
Do you mind if I? Do
No.
you mind if I take this one?
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
So it is really just about if the individual Trump supporter who is a MAGA person truly believes something that is verifiably false by anyone outside of MAGA and perhaps even people inside of MAGA, that person and all of the other people who believe that same thing with them who happen to be MAGA have mass formation psychosis or formation mass.
No, they're liars.
Well,
No.
no.
Yeah, you
No, no,
can't.
no, no.
That's the thing, though. You
See
can't
how we
do
are
that.
bickering. Where
Here's the best.
where is Chloe when we need her the most?
Here's the
look at
Oh
best
Ray
man,
should have
I
description.
really
love Chloe. I
synthesized
haven't seen her in a
everything.
minute. I hope
I know
she
I
shows
miss
up.
Chloe. So here's the
Yeah.
thing. When it comes to mass formation psychosis, you have to be careful of two distinct problems. One is the divisional problem, which is just because one component of mass psychosis or mass formation psychosis is present does not mean all of mass formation psychosis is true. On the opposite side of that, right? Just because everything within mass formation psychosis can be construed as mass formation psychosis doesn't mean that it necessarily is, right? We're exploring kind of the concept of what could be, not what is. My complaint here is that there is some kind of a structure that seems consistent, even though we may not be able to consistently form our belief or our conception of what's going on. We may just have a problem where we lack the ability to describe the process that we see.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to confuse could be with is. I can stop there.
I'm not going to do that either, because that's an is-out distinction that I'm not going to try and make. What I am going to say is that there are consistencies with what you could perceive as mass formation psychosis, right? You can look at the criteria that could be a part of that, and you can say, how many of these criteria is this group meeting? If they're meeting these, could it possibly be mass formation psychosis? That's the point. That's the critical aspect of it. Sorry?
It could possibly be something else.
Right, but this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we define the difference between what is and what is not based on okay, let me rephrase that. What is something is not necessarily derivative of what ought to be. Right? So if a group of people do believe in all of the things that would meet the criteria of mass formation psychosis, should we then ought to believe that it is, or should we still continue to be critical when we're discussing it? And that's my perspective. I'm being critical of what we are discussing, even though I acknowledge that it may not be. And I love GOJ. Okay. I love that. Well, I love that guy because he brings up great points. I apologize if it's psychobabble, but this is the way that I think.
Down on the side of if it could be, it isn't. It could be something else. And quite frankly, I'll go back to the very beginning of, the conversation. I don't think in 2023 mass psychosis exists.
If you want my truth, this is my truth. I think what we call mass formation psychosis, we already have words for. It's called in-group, out-group bias. Plain and simple.
Well, as long as you're not calling it psychosis, because psychosis implies.
Okay. Would you agree that there's mass hysteria? Would you agree there's mass hysteria?
I would agree with that to a certain extent, so long as it didn't encompass the entire group, because it's impossible to make that claim.
I think that's a cop-out.
I don't agree with you, Steve. I don't agree, but this is why. When I think of, and I want to, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm crossing wires here because everybody was talking kind of at the same time for a second. But mass hysteria makes me think of the satanic panic, right? Back, I think it was, yeah, wasn't it late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there. And I remember this because I was actually around at the time, and my parents were super religious. And we're very concerned about, Harry Potter having demons and all of that kind of stuff. And it was just, not only inappropriate for me, but filth that should be burned if it was encountered out in the wild. Like they really felt strongly about this. Yes. Okay. So like that is the kind of thing where it's like,
you Americans
that is mass hysteria. What's that?
So you Americans, you party too hard with everything.
Oh yeah, we don't do anything in yeah. No, it's all full.
No,
measure.
We full send everything.
Yep, pretty much. But
we are the country of hold my beer.
Yes, we really are. Yeah, ergo NASCAR. But
Let me. No, go ahead.
so let me finish my point real quick. My point was simply that I think was mass hysteria. I think, and the mass hysteria of that time was based largely in belief, and was also based on a fallacy where that had to do, well, maybe not a fallacy. There was an artifact there, and the artifact, I mean, in a data sense, the artifact that was there was that, oh, we've seen this happen several times recently in the news. It must be this huge underground conspiracy thing, when really it's just that, okay, this wasn't reported much at all beforehand. It becomes reported a couple times. People think that it is everywhere, and it is like this all present thing. And that brought the mass hysteria. I think that we're in a different time period now. We've had a lot of experience with the boom and bust of, everything from Vines to, MySpace to Facebook and now TikTok. And there will always be a thing that has its day and then is gone. I think that we process these things a lot differently now. I'm not saying that it's not possible for us to have mass hysteria, but I don't think that it's quite the same. It's not as simple. The mass hysteria, if you want to call it, on the right um, around the mandates and the vaccines and stuff like that, I don't actually think was that ridiculous. They basically were just saying, hey, look, we really don't think that you have enough proof for all this. And and on top of that, a power grab at this moment seems like something that, it's really against you know our feelings. We're really not okay with you messing with liberty. That's something that is kind of a crucial virtue for us. And so, ergo that whole thing happened. I just don't think it's quite as simple as that. And I think that there was more reason for people to think that way in that instance. Are you talking about something different though, Steve?
I'm not sure where you're going with that, but let me give you a perfect example, right? So mass formation psychosis could be explained, or I should say, we could example it by the conservative rights. How would you put that? The conservative right had a belief that vaccines were bullshit. Whether they had the proof or not, even when faced with evidence to the contrary that it did work, especially for the elderly, especially with people with health issues, they still refused to believe that it had any worth to the discussion, right? They would actively seek out evidence that would confirm their beliefs. And this is a large swath of the conservative right here in the United States, especially in my state, Florida, other conservative states. Vice versa, you had a left liberal or a left progressive aspect that refused to believe, even given the evidence, that this could possibly be a lab leak. Right? So you had mass psychosis on both sides, who refused to see any evidence to the contrary of their own beliefs that their group believed.
Stanley, you only started shaking your head when we started talking about the left, bro. What's going on?
Yeah, but not the right. Like, what's the deal, dude? I think you have some implicit bias, Stanley.
No, I don't. I think neither are under any sort of mass psychosis. I think neither or both have hard and fast and heartfelt beliefs.
You mean
it's
the component?
It's not mass psychosis.
You mean the component of emotional intensity and group identity, along with the resistance to overt alternative viewpoints? Three of the main markers of mass formation psychosis.
I'm even going to give MAGA the benefit of the doubt that they.
Oh Jesus! I can't wait to hear this.
What they believe. Heartfelt is not the same thing as psychotic.
I'm not saying that. Again, that's an equivocation.
You are.
No, I'm not. I'm saying there's distinct components of mass formation psychosis that we can see.
Could be is not equivalent to is.
So let me ask this a different way if I can.
Oh,
And I
because I have
apologize.
a question for the group.
I told Charles earlier I'm in an intense amount of pain today, so I took some
Oh.
ibuprofen and Tylenol, and I also had like three glasses of
You-
scotch,
you
so I'm like 3 sheets to the wind right now.
You need to
So
go find that pot. It's in Utah.
I can't stand it, dude. I can't stand it. It makes me feel sick. But let me ask you. Let me ask this question a little bit differently. If
Oh, and I
mass
have a
formation
question.
psychosis was real, if it was true, if we had the data to support it, which we don't, I agree with that criticism.
Then why
What
are
then
you
would it
fighting
look
so hard?
like? I'm sorry?
Why are you fighting so hard if there's no data?
Because this is a conceptual discussion on whether or not there's enough information for the average human being, the average American or average Nigerian for that matter, to say maybe this is something that we need to look at a little bit more. Maybe this is something that we can use to help bring people out of their cognitive dissonance to maybe see different factual information and create, instead of being afraid to have an idea or a different belief than everybody else, because that's really what it's question here. Can we
Well,
break people out of this lockstep belief system with their group to be able to see different information, to come to a different conclusion, even if it's in contrary to their group identity's belief? That's the big thing that I'm worried about. I'm worried about people just following lockstep. That's my big concern. I'm not drunk, GOJ. I'm not drunk. I feel
okay,
good
well,
now.
let me ask you a question. You are hoping to break people out of something. They don't read books. They don't read books.
Imagine,
Steven. Yeah, go ahead.
imagine Stan and Steve drunk at a bar. Good Lord.
I would pay to watch that. I would buy a round of drinks for everybody because
I've invited Stanley to go camping with me, and we're gonna get shit faced.
That sounds fun, man.
Well,
When you
Senior
do
Chief,
that, you
I'm not
better
drunk.
let me know.
I'm not
I'll
drunk
fly out
yet
there.
either.
I ran out of scotch, so I'm good.
Well, all I'm saying is you're trusting people. Someone, I think it was you, Steve, who said people don't read books. I think they're going to be locked into their beliefs. And this is a question for the group. Black Americans, and I'm just going to be the hypothetical Black American spokesman here. I consider American white supremacy mass psychosis. How do you respond to that?
Well, let's take a look at that real quick. So let's look at the 5 criteria. A hypnotic-like state, right? I think this is going to trip you out, Stanley, because I'm actually probably going to end up agreeing with you. Proponents of the concept suggests that people are a part of mass formation psychosis are in a kind of hypnotic-like state where they are highly suggestible and impervious to contrary evidence. If you're a white supremacist and you have these beliefs, how likely are you to change those beliefs if given a different perspective? Probably not much. You're probably going to follow lockstep. Shared narrative. Obviously, you share your racism. You share the belief that other races are beneath you,
and
right?
an alternative view of history.
And an alternative view of history. Emotional intensity. Obviously, people who are white supremacists have an intense desire to be on top as a white group, right? Group identity. Boom, you have whiteness, right? If you want to call it that. And you have resistance to alternative viewpoints, which means they are very, very at a default position where they're incapable of seeing Black people as human beings, capable of all the same values and all the same beautifulness that they themselves are. I would say yes, white supremacy and those who endorse white supremacy would be falling victim and
Stanley,
prey to mass formation psychosis.
So that so that you just bring down the whole building, right?
So MAGA, neither MAGA nor woke is America's mass psychosis. White supremacy is. I agree.
All of them could be. If we looked at all of them,
Nope,
I agree with you.
Stanley, it
Okay.
can't just be one. It doesn't have to be one. It can be all.
It can be all of them.
I'd like to make a fine distinction again, though.
Wait till I tell Anon.
I'd like to make another fine distinction, though. We have to remember that even in any of these groups, there are people who are true believers only on the outside, and they're using the group for their own ends. And that tends to be the leadership of most of these cults, ultimately. And so it's important to realize that a lot of the people who are the rank and file soldiers in that kind of an ideology, who are under the mass, formation psychosis or hypnosis or whatever you want to call it, they are probably like Steve said. But a lot of the people who are leading it all, they are not under any illusions. They know what the history is. They know all of this stuff. And they're like, hey, if I can get some power for myself, if I can make some things happen, and also maybe I just hate people, there's definitely no shortage of people who just want to have a situation exist so that they can just be malevolent. Like, oh, great. Like, so, this affords me the opportunity to have people who will cover for
That's a
me while I
roundabout
do
way
the
of saying
depraved things
politician,
I want to
right?
do. I'm sorry.
That's a much more warrior way of saying politician.
Yes, correct.
So here's my perspective here, and this is something that I've read a little bit into, and Hannah Arendt covers it in her book Authoritarian Totalitarianism. Is if you look at Weimar Germany, right, and you look at the events that led up to the Second World War and the Nazi Party taking control, you would have a really difficult time convincing me that every single German in Germany believed as the Nazi Party did, right? But they still followed the Nazi Party leadership. This is exactly what I would consider mass formation psychosis, where you didn't even have to believe 100% in what the group was doing, but you still follow it as if there was no other choice. This component is the component of hypnotism. The very first argument that I made in mass formation psychosis. So let me explain it to you this way. So the very first one I have written down here is a hypnotic-like state. So if you look at hypnosis, you are very suggestible. And it's possible that there was a large group of Germans who did believe over time, once enough suggestion was made, that the Nazi Party was right. Like, there was no way that the Nazi Party could have come to that level of power had that not happened. Now, if you look, and this is why I say Nazi Germany was definitely mass formation psychosis, look at the dissenters of the Nazi Party. Look at the people who disagreed and fought against them. What happened to them? Anybody? They were sent to concentration camps, or they were out and out shot in fields. This is an extremely accurate component of mass formation psychosis. Once you try to disagree with the mass part of that word, of that title, what happens? The rest of the group will not allow that dissension to become critical.
That doesn't mean it was hot hypnosis. Hypnosis to me means that you are not aware, that your agency has somehow been undercut from you. Your legs have been cut out from under you. You are not the person with the locomotion anymore. Things are just carrying you. And to a degree, I understand what you're saying, because it's a fine distinction. But to me, it's really just most of these people were following their incentives. And their incentives are, don't get thrown in a concentration camp, don't get shot or hung, right?
I've got an argument. Got an argument.
Let me respond.
What? Hold on. What is gaslighting?
Oh man, I'm never good with the actual. Please give me the. Yeah, I always forget this one.
You change the reality of the person that you're discussing the issue with, right? You tell them that their reality is not real. How is that not a form of hypnosis? You are convincing someone
No,
that their reality is not real.
no.
But where does this
Gaslighting has
factor in for
nothing.
Germans who were in Germany but not part of the Nazi Party
I'm just
during
saying
World
that
War II?
gaslighting is a component or componentially part of hypnosis. It can
No,
be hypnosis.
no.
No, I do understand what you're saying. So it's like yeah, you're misconstruing something um you know with the purpose of kind of unsettling the other person and getting
Right.
them to
So
do what you want.
let me give the
Gaslighting,
definition of hypnosis. The
gaslighting is a
induction.
fancy way of saying lie, lying.
No,
No,
but it's
Okay,
deeper than
no.
that. It has other
no, I
things
don't
to it
agree
though,
with that.
Stanley.
It's simply lying.
Yeah, but isn't there lots of
That's
different
not
kinds of lies?
hypnosis. That's
Like there's white
misleading.
lies that we say to
Misleading
someone.
isn't misdirection. Misleading is lying.
So here's the definition of gaslight. Manipulate using psychological methods into questioning. Manipulate someone using psychological methods into questioning their own sanity or powers of reasoning. Now, here's the
Does it
definition of
mention
hypnosis.
lying? Does it mention a
Here's
lie?
here's hypnosis: the induction of a state of consciousness in which a person apparently loses the power of voluntary action and is highly responsive to suggestion or direction.
In
Tell me
other
how
words, I no
closely.
longer understand the reality that I live
Loses?
in. You tell me what to do.
Correct.
Yeah.
No,
That right
no.
fucking there.
Voluntary
Yeah.
action is the key.
But
Someone
okay, so
chooses.
gaslighting.
Someone chooses not to question.
Gaslighting is the same process. You're using psychological
No,
methods into making them question their own sanity or powers of reasoning. They lose the ability to reason. That's the whole reason why
I
gaslighting
don't agree.
works.
Gaslighting, you don't lose your ability to reason in gaslighting. You have the
Absolutely, you
ability.
do.
Okay, Steve, I'll
Steve, I
stop
disagree
playing.
with that.
I'll
I
stop.
I think I'm with
You
Stanley on this one.
always
You
have
don't
the
lose.
ability to
Yeah,
question in a gaslight
you
situation.
just don't
If you
question. You
choose
succumb to it.
to go along with it, that's a choice.
Well, that's like telling hundreds of thousands of victims of domestic violence that they had a choice.
They do.
I'm not for that argument.
In a lot
No,
of cases, I'm
Steve, this
not
is
going to
being
make a
hyperbolic. Steve, your
100% they
your
all
example
do.
your
But
example
how
is
many of those domestic abuse people stay for the children? They're
And there's
making a
another point.
choice. That's a
The
choice.
children
That's
don't
a
have the
choice.
concept of reasoning that
That
adults
is
do
a
either.
choice. There are other people who would go, the best thing for the children is to get out of an abusive situation.
Do you know how you hypnotize
It's a
someone?
choice.
By suggestion.
You know
By
what,
but Steve,
suggestion.
I
dude?
You
think it's
Let
override
me
their
tell you
reasoning.
a hypnosis story. I had a friend of mine, this was back in high school. To be hypnotized, you have to want or submit to being hypnotized. It's a
Sure.
choice.
Right.
If
And
you don't want to be hypnotized, you will not be hypnotized. And I have a personal story.
I
I had a
disagree.
friend of mine who like attempted it with me, and
I
every time
disagree,
he'd
Stanley.
have me count backwards, and every time I made a mistake, I would snap out of it because I don't like making mistakes. Now that was 40 years ago.
so
Hypnosis is a choice. Gaslighting is a lie to induce a choice. That is the difference.
I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Disagree all you want. Be right back.
What were you going to say, Charles?
Yeah, so I was going to say, first of all, I think there was a point Stanley was making that I agreed with about gaslighting. That I can't remember the point, but I know I agreed with him somewhere, and then I disagreed with him in this part where he said it's a choice, right? I I, I get what he's trying to say. That people can be people who are hypnotized somehow want to be hypnotized, right? Okay, so let me give you a little story. When I was small, I was always fascinated about these pastors that do these sort of miracles where they lay hands on someone and then the person falls down. I always found it funny, right? But
Right.
I went to one church with my mom, and the pastor was just doing that with some other people, and I told myself, I said, today I want to really find out if this guy is really pushing people or they're really falling under the anointing, right? And he basically tried to push me, and I did not want to fall. I didn't fall, right? So if I was already suggestible to that, if I had already believed that probably it was the anointing, it would have been very easy for me to quote and unquote fall under the anointing because I was already suggestible to it. But because I had that I it didn't I had that skepticism. It did not work. So in a sense, I get what Stanley is saying, that it can be for you to be hypnotized, you have to sort of want it. Yeah.
You have to submit.
And that's
I
what
let me give you an example of gaslighting at its best. If you question white fragility, you are showing your white fragility.
Don't agree
That's
with
fucking
that.
gaslighting. That is fucking gaslighting.
Don't agree with that.
You are removing someone's choice. That is what it is, man. I don't know how to. I don't know how much better concrete evidence I can show for it than
repeat
that.
that? Repeat that.
This came straight out of Robin DiAngelo's book.
Fine.
If you question white fragility, you are showing your white fragility. It's a Kafka trap.
I disagree with her statement.
As do I. And thank God we agree on that. But what my point with that is that is how you circumvent choice, by not giving them a choice.
Okay, but let me ask you a quick question. Does that mean white fragility doesn't exist?
Nope.
Just because.
Nope. Because I will agree. You're kind of, someone's breaking up. I don't know if it's me or not. But to give you credit here, white fragility probably is a thing, and as a matter of fact, I think it is. But I think forcing everyone to believe that it's true for them is definitely gaslighting.
Yes. She basically says every white person has white fragility, and I thoroughly disagree with that. Not white people who aren't fragile.
Right.
I mean, that's an obvious. I think I'll leave it there. I agree with you, Steve. I think those are the things that she should have avoided to be more effective in her argument. Some of that, well, I'm going to say it's bullshit.
Right.
What she did, in my mind, is unforgivable because her premise is right, but she's also, she was kind of technically an academic. She wasn't like a academic. She's not a rhetorician, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, I want to steel man you for a second here, Stanley, because it seems like I'm being very. I don't want to be sounding like I'm dismissive or combative.
No,
it's just I'm trying to stick to my position here. But
Steve,
I want to steel man you.
We have history. I don't think so.
Okay. I agree with much of what you're saying. I think that we should question whether mass formation psychosis is even applicable. My understanding of what you're arguing here is there's components of mass formation psychosis that even we may possibly think shouldn't even be a component of it, and that we should question whether or not it is actually true. Would that be an accurate representation of what you're saying?
No, I don't think in 2023 there are very few places, especially in the West, that you could assemble enough components to make a mass uh, psychosis. We have too many ways to avoid it, be it information technology, be it just simple checks and balances in our government. You know, you can win the presidency and win the popular vote and still lose in the electoral college.
Right.
There are I think there's enough. Trump, he had a vice president who just didn't feel comfortable doing what he wanted to do. Luck, maybe. There's people who argue it was luck. There was people who said that, hey, the founding fathers really knew what they were doing. Doesn't matter. I don't think you can assemble enough components to make a mass psychosis. So
let me see if I can give you another example, one that is specific to me that most people may not understand. So I grew up LDS, Latter-day Saint, right? Mormon, as other people would put it. Now, in the church, there was not a lot of room for dissension. You had to follow lock and step, whether you saw something different or not. Questioning the church was not allowed. It was not, I would say socially, it was not permitted. And what happened is enough times my questions weren't answered sufficiently, so I left. But the fact that remains that such a large group of individuals still. Oh, Mark, you might want to shut down.
Finally,
down.
we have Mark. Hi,
Mark,
Mark.
shut your YouTube off. Shut your YouTube off.
How do I do that?
Go wherever you've got YouTube running concurrently with this. Shut the tab off.
Okay, I didn't.
Because it'll do a feedback loop and it'll cause an echo.
I'm in, but I'm out. Steve, I don't think I have YouTube running with that.
Okay, just make sure, and I'll finish my sentence here, or my point. So I was able to break out of what I would consider a mass formation psychosis because I defiantly questioned the narrative. But there's so many people. I mean, we have I think it's several billion people that are members of the church that refuse to acknowledge those dissensions. I would argue that they are victims of mass formation psychosis.
I don't know. I mean, you're basically calling faith psychosis, and
No. I'm specifically being critical of the LDS Church, not Christianity in total. Because I mean, Charles is really great at like questioning dogma, right? He's not the dogmatic type. He's like, I'm going to question this whether I believe it or not. I'm going to question its validity, right? That's really the whole reason why all of us are here.
Well, let
So
me ask
it is
you.
possible to be a person of faith, but not be not fall victim to mass formation psychosis.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is Stockholm syndrome mass psychosis?
I would have to think about that.
Because
Give me a minute.
I would say.
Well, no, it wouldn't because it's only
Now,
one individual. It wouldn't be mass,
You
but it
know
would be
my
a,
history.
it wouldn't be psychosis either.
I've had experience in Utah. My wife's like side of the family, you know, some of them were LDS. I still, you know, some of her family I still talk to. Great people. I never felt that they were under any sort of psychosis. It was faith. That's how it always struck me. I mean, they're Catholics, they're Pentecostals, even Pentecostals. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call them mass, you know, under the spell of mass psychosis. I'm uncomfortable with basically extreme faith or maybe even fundamentalism being mass psychosis. There's choice involved, like you had.
Well, I think there's a critical component of this that I've left out. and I have to admit my mistake here.
So please, guys, Mark has been trying to join since we started. So maybe we
2 weeks
can
ago.
give him.
Well, let me finish this up then.
All
Please,
right.
I
So
Steve.
think
finish your thoughts then, Mark. And
I
go.
think mass formation psychosis is very weak. I think it's easy to break out of it, but I think the lure is very strong. So it is possible to break out of it and break out of it fairly easily, but the lure is very, very strong. So it is possible that it does exist, but only compartmentally, where you could break any one of those 5 steps very easily. So I want to admit the lackluster strength of my argument.
All right, Mark. So it's on to you.
Well, at this late stage with my battery running down to 36%, I don't want to talk too long, but I would offer as a possible example of a syndrome that is a mass psychosis, but it's a small mass, would be Havana syndrome, where supposedly our officials in diplomats in Havana, Cuba, were attacked by some type of device, some energy device that gave them severe headaches and other issues. Now, there's been a tremendous amount of study on that, and the general consensus on that, I think, is that that did not happen. But those people who were victims of that somehow, most of them anyway, it's never an all, most of them come up with the same symptoms and the same story. So here's an example of something that's very odd. I think that's a possible small example of mass psychosis.
I think it's a great example of that.
My, I'll leave you with this because it's getting late and I'm going to run out of battery where I am. When I saw that presentation I sent to you, Charles, I was struck by the plausibility of the idea that people accept en masse the idea that more and more government control and protection of them is a better thing. This leading towards totalitarianism. Psychologically, I think people are built with two bents, if you will, two propensities. One of them to be very independent, and the other to have a need for care and protection. One leads towards totalitarianism, and perhaps the other leads towards anarchy, neither of which is good. So, what came to my mind when I saw that mass psychosis concept was how we in the West have structured a government over our government. And I have a model of that I would like to post on the Discord cat site. I don't know how to show it to you here so we could discuss it, but I think we could discuss it separately in chat. And it shows how our national government is no longer our national government, which is a big problem for the right. But it is a policy. Our national governments are policy implementers for higher level organizations such as the UN, the World Health Organization, many, many more. And above that sits the WEF, Council of Foreign Relations. Above that, you're sitting the Bank of International Settlements and the central banking system. These have taken policy creation over the national level, and the national governments have become implementers of those policies. Now, Trump was the antithesis of that, and that's why Trump was so embraced by the people on the right who tend to be less desirous of more totalitarian themes. So
Can I
that's what
ask
came to
you,
my mind.
doesn't the
Good point.
U.S. pretty much lead all those organizations?
No,
No,
that's the
it,
problem.
yeah.
The
Okay.
U.S. does not lead itself. The U.S. is nothing but another policy distributor for those greater organizations that are global. And I think that's
And
something that,
you're and
yeah,
you're saying things got better in the 4 years Trump was president.
I didn't
No, he
say
didn't
that
say
at
that.
all. I didn't
No.
say that at all.
You also
No.
have the World Health Organization and NATO.
Okay.
Well, all those. I'm going to post the model that I have, and you guys absorb that, and let's meet again to talk about the reality or perhaps my psychosis about that.
I like that.
Ooh, was
So,
that a red cape in front of me?
No, no, guys, remember,
That's a great stinger, though. This guy must have been in promotions.
my
Like,
person, my uh, my experience through my working years, and I can remember some connections in my schooling years. Is I tend to be less authoritarian. I don't like authority, and I don't like to be told what to do. I like to cooperatively make my own decisions. As Stanley, as you know, I tend to relate to someone who gets very demeaned very easily, Ayn Rand. I'm more what she would call an objectivist. I
Really?
need to I need to buy in. I'm willing to buy into anything that makes sense for me.
very
Well,
It's
libertarian
hold
of you.
on.
yeah,
That's
radical
not
libertarian, even.
objectivism.
but I
Objectivism.
guess I resent and I fight back against something that is being forced on me. Sometimes even if that's for my own good, but my psychology tends to be
That's
less totalitarian.
not is objective. No, objectivism is detractors be damned.
You're
You
breaking up, Stanley.
you
Um,
broke up, Stanley.
He said
this
he
is
said objective.
No,
Oh,
you
sorry.
you've read The Fountainhead. Howard
No, I
Roark
have not.
didn't care. You've
I did not
not.
read the. I did not
Oh,
read
you
her.
got to.
we might have lost Mark or me.
No, I never even
Nope,
got
it's
to
not
say
me.
hello. At least now
You
I
know
know what he
that's
looks like.
yeah.
You can't
This
be an objectivist without having read The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. My goodness, he's
you can be an
missing out.
objectivist. Ayn Rand was not the one that created the terminology for objectivism.
Well, Derek Bell wasn't the one who created CRT, but look what happened.
Progenitor, yeah. So like this is a great example. I'm glad that Mark brought this up. So I've said this multiple times
You
during
better
multiple
come
of
back.
discussions of ours. Well, I think his battery's almost dead. I am a horrible libertarian. Right? I detract from the concept that the free market is the best market because you cannot have a free market without regulations because people will build shitty houses that will inevitably kill people. And now here's the argument that libertarians will make. Well, eventually the system will self-right. Okay, that does not account for the fact that hundreds of people may have died because of regulations you could have easily implemented that did not deny your ability to build the house in the first place.
Can I make
This
a
is
quick
why I'm a
point?
horrible libertarian. I always have been, but I am more libertarian than most political associations.
The housing market is going to self-regulate in Turkey after the earthquake.
I'm sorry?
I said the housing market in Turkey is going to self-regulate after this earthquake.
Yeah, but see, this is why I'm a detractor of libertarianism in this aspect, because I think that's the natural state of human beings to do that. We don't
Yep.
need a political ideology to associate ourselves with that perspective. But what we do need is to understand that human nature does actually fucking exist, right? We will do whatever is possible at the cheapest price. And the reason why those regulations are in place is to prevent us from doing that with deleterious effects. So we
Let me
have to
ask.
have regulations to say, here's how you build a house to society's standards where it is safe. There is nothing more fucking libertarian than that. And this is the
Well,
part that libertarians piss me off, when they do not accept the fact that regulations are part of the libertarian process of the self-writing system. That's how we self-write it, is we create regulations that are necessary. That's the self-writing procedure. And libertarians who disagree with this fundamentally don't understand libertarianism.
I'm gonna
That's my
say,
rant for the day.
I'm gonna say that you're a rarity. Most libertarians will disagree with you.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
because I
died in
fucking
the
read.
well. So like this is the thing, right?
The
I think that
nicest people who have
libertarianism.
taken over the Libertarian Party.
I won't get into that right now. What were you saying, Ben?
Well, I think that there's a distinction to be made between individualism and collectivism, and I think that libertarians tend to actually go too far with that. I think that there is always going to be a kind of not in my backyard aspect to being a human,
Right.
where it's like, oh, this is why, for example, you wouldn't call, like, I don't know, maybe Ayn Rand would hate HOAs, right? But the
Oh, she
fact
would
is that,
detest them.
right. But the fact is that it's like, okay, look, if your neighbor just, decided one day to put a huge ass addition on their tiny little condo, and now your entire living space, front and backyard, is just dominated by windows, looking at you from this monstrosity, it's just one of those things. It's like we have to be able to do both. And I definitely agree with you. I think that there are limitations on libertarianism, but I also think that a lot of the fundamentals of libertarianism, where they align with a lot of the things that the founding fathers talked about preserving the rights of individuals to make choices, I think that part of it is really good. So
I don't think the founding fathers would be considered libertarian.
I
it
don't
depends
think
on
so
which one
either.
you're
It was,
talking about, I guess. Like,
well, libertarian as a
Jefferson was
movement was
really,
created in the 1960s, so we have to pay attention to that. But it did
yeah.
use heavily. It did rely heavily on the work of John Locke and Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill. But
Alexis de
again,
Tocqueville.
Alexis de Tocqueville. But I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that. My point is that there are, and it pains me to say this because it's so antithetical to the movement, but there are extreme libertarians, which is so mind-boggling. But in essence, libertarianism, if you wanted to boil it down, we also libertarian also used a lot of David Boaz, Boaz. If you want to read up on his book called Libertarianism, great book. But
Any relation to the?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
France
France Boaz. Yeah, I believe there is a relationship. Which France Boaz was the father of sociology and the very first person in academia to really push hard the belief that or to criticize the belief that racialized black folk were different fundamentally. Like he was like, there is no fundamental difference.
He was
between
like
racialized black and white people.
Zora Neale Hurston's mentor.
Yeah, they worked very, very close together. Absolutely. And that's why I love Franz Boas. But to get back to the point at hand here, I think, even with mass formation psychosis, we can even dive into that in the sense that it is a form of extremism. Which again, I make the argument that mass formation psychosis doesn't need to be a term. It really doesn't. We can see these examples that I've listed, the 5 examples that I've listed. We could terminologically associate those with extremism.
Yeah.
It's all compositionally similar to the movement of extremism. So I think it's a little bit of a obsequious use of the terminology. We don't need it. We really don't need the words mass formation psychosis because it's such a loose term. It's non-definitive. It's easy to break out of. Easy to form, easy to break out of. I think it's kind of like it's like gravity. It's very weak, but once you get trapped in it, it can be very strong. So I'm not sold on the belief that mass formation psychosis is something that is actually real and you can actually touch it, but it does bring into the topic of conversation the deleterious effects of what it could be and what extremism could be and what following leadership without questioning could be and what it looks like. That's kind of where I'm coming at the angle from.
Well, let me ask you a question on that matter. Let's look at, say, a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who is she following?
This is where I have to tell you, I really just don't follow fringe Republican politics enough to know much.
She's
but
not fringe.
from what
She's literally in the House of Representatives.
Well, I'm sorry. Like Bernie Sanders is certainly fringe on the left. I mean, if you look at
yeah,
you know what I'm
He's in
saying?
the
Like,
Senate.
yes.
well, that
Just
doesn't
because
mean that they
someone
can't be
has
fringe.
doesn't mean that like
Yes, it does. Somebody voted for him. Dude
just
ran for president. How is he fringe?
well, he's
Can
if
you
he
be-
made
He
it,
also
if he
lost.
was the president, right? If
Can
he
you
if he
be
made it to be the
fringe?
president, then you could say that.
Can you be fringe and be president? Because there are people who will say Donald Trump was fringe.
I would say that as well.
I think he's
mainstream. I don't think so, though. So, Steve, what about, like, I think that his message resonated especially with older Gen Xers and boomers. And the
I'm
remainder
being
of
cynical, Ben. I'm being cynical
okay.
and comedic,
Oh,
but
okay.
a little bit serious, but not really serious. I'm kind of in that middle zone there.
I guess all I'm saying with that is that he knew who the largest group was that he needed to talk to and knew the language. I mean, it was his own language. I mean, he's part of that same generation pretty much. So
I voted for him in the primaries.
Yeah.
And I cannot stand what some of the things that he does. The reason why I voted for Bernie, and I'll just make it very, very simple, very, very sweet. He has been the most consistent politician that I can think of. He has always consistently fought for what he believed in. He's never flip-flopped. He's never gone the other way just because of social pressures. He has been ideologically very, very consistent. And I would much rather have someone consistent in their beliefs and their thoughts than Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton.
Well,
luckily for me, I eventually voted for Jo Jorgensen. Because I wasn't aware that she was running up until the point that I actually voted for.
Let me add a point to Bernie's consistency. He basically lost. I think it was 2020 because when reparations came up, he wasn't going to do it. He stuck to, the progressive line that class, looking at American, whatever society through a racial lens is race reductionism. He was going to stick to class as kind of the, the base or the lens he was going to govern on. And he basically
not surprising. He's a socialist.
There's nothing wrong with socialism.
I just got to say we hopscotched the fuck out of the.
I didn't say anything was wrong.
What I'm saying is Bernie basically
didn't say anything was wrong with
lost
socialism.
the presidential election, sticking to his principles, and you have to admire that. He could have said, "Hey, I'm all for reparations." He
I
could have.
I I don't want to go down this too far because it's so off topic and we hopscotched away from the the main
You brought
topic.
up
But
Bernie.
I know I did. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to say what I was going to say because it's going to take us down the wrong route here. But
Oh,
um, I think the main premise that we're getting to here is that everybody here knows and can agree that there are groups of people
it's
who
not
believe the same
true.
thing, who refuse to believe anything else otherwise, and follow lockstep procedures with their groups. This is the concern that I have, and why I can argue mass formation psychosis from the perspective that I do is because I see components of it realistically in almost every single group, but one of the primary components is an inability to question the group's narrative. Like, this is one of the biggest features of it. Like, are you afraid to question your group's narrative? If you are, you may be in a situation where you need to be considering this issue.
Let me ask you a question on that specific point. Okay. Afraid or lacking courage, or is that the same thing? Because in Germany, if you dissented, you might wind up shot. In
Right.
America, you might be Scott Adams canceled, which is actually being held accountable for your point of view and what
Right.
you say.
I think both
So
of those perspectives could be true.
yeah, but I don't think people in Germany may have had a reason to be afraid. It was existential. I don't agree that people in America, you can say what you want to say. You can dissent. Being canceled is not a death sentence. So, how
Stefan
about
Molyneux would
the
disagree,
courage
but
of
I
your
agree with you.
convictions, like Bernie did? Technically, Bernie was canceled by the black community in South Carolina because he was not going to do the reparations, kowtowing.
Man, I have so many issues with this. I
I
don't
think
want to get
he
into it.
stood by his principles.
I think he did. I like Bernie as a person because he sticks to his guns. Like, he's always consistently done that. Despite the issues that I have with him and his
I think
political beliefs, he's such a likable guy just because he sticks to his principles.
I don't
I'd
think
shake his hand.
I don't think being afraid of disagreeing with the majority in America, if you're scared to do that, it's a cop out.
Hmm.
You
I,
don't
I,
have
I,
the courage of your convictions.
I think that's a valid point. Absolutely. Some people are much less they're much less strong-willed than is necessary. Um, that's the component of this that I mean, this is kind of the wild card in the mix here, if you excuse my proverbial example here. But I think that kind of goes to the point. It's like, has your courage been eroded so much that you don't feel that you can speak? I think that's a component of that discussion too. But
Yes.
at the end of the day, are you questioning it but just don't have the courage? Well, I would say that you're not trapped in mass formation psychosis then, because you are actively questioning it, at least in your own head. It's the individuals that refuse to question it, even when alternative evidence is presented to you. Those are the people that I'm concerned about.
Well, I think people question stuff in their head all the time, I hope. I mean, I would
I don't
be
know.
now, this is an article of faith. I'm assuming that most people question stuff. Um, and I won't go too far down this road, but most people questioned Trump and grabbing P words and all this stuff. They were more for his policies. And this is maybe an argument down the road. We don't have to deal with it now. If there's mass psychosis, It's that character doesn't matter on the right. That's a mass psychosis.
Maybe.
Character does not
I mean,
matter.
it's not that
Marjorie
it doesn't.
Taylor
Well,
Greene. Marjorie
okay. I
Taylor
mean,
Greene.
hear me out. I mean, we have. I think that there's kind of this pyramid of values that people hold, and I think that most of the time,
Value.
I think you're right. I think that character would really matter. If we had a field of candidates who were all, at least concerned about the same issues that the majority of Americans cared about, then character would be a much bigger defining factor in making the decision. But because Trump seemed to be the only one who was talking about things that a lot of Americans on the right, but just also Americans in general, felt were important, then he would not
He
would not
didn't
have had
win
the
the
sway that he
popular
did.
vote.
But that's not that. Yeah, but what I'm
So
saying,
most Americans technically did not agree.
well, okay, a large enough amount of them agreed.
No,
Well,
he won the
don't
election.
mistake popularism for evidence. Like that's the problem. Is like just because
Well,
he
no.
wasn't popular doesn't mean that people didn't vote for him. You can
I'm gonna
detest
let the
someone and
numbers-
still vote for
I'm
them.
going to let the numbers speak for themselves or itself. Trump did not win a majority of votes in 2016. He won votes in the right places. That's how he won the Electoral College. You can't argue that most Americans might have kind of not agreed with Trump's character. My argument is going to be 3 million plus more didn't want Trump as president.
Yeah, but popular does not mean right.
Popular means Trump did not win a majority of the vote. I'm not going to read more into that.
Sure.
I am going to say most people didn't want Trump to be president. I think that is self-evident.
I think enough wanted him to win that he did.
In the right places.
Right, in the right places. It just so happened that there were more people in the right places. Right, more votes, more representation in the right places.
More people disagreed with Trump than agreed with him.
But he still got elected.
Yeah, I mean,
and I
you're
hate
right,
that.
Stanley.
I hate that.
That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But yeah. What were you going to say, Ben?
No, I'm sorry. I have to give Stanley the point there. You're right. So, I guess what I'm saying, though, is that what we should really be angling for is a better selection criteria for candidates so that more of them basically, like, right. Okay, so I'm looking for a house right now. I'm trying to buy a house.
Good
luck.
It's
a rough, yeah, right. It's rough right now, as probably you guys know. And even with all of my scrimping and saving and rolling my condos, equity into another home, I am still only just really in the kind of very lowest level, most competitive strata for trying to find a house, which means that my laundry list of things that I want in a seller's market is going to be truncated because I'm not going to get everything that I want in the next house that I buy. I'm going to have to choose between, location, having close access to things, but having a smaller house and having higher taxes, or being further away from key things, but having maybe more property, kind of a, not so great house that's probably 80 or 100 years old, that is going to require a lot of fixing up. So I have to make these decisions. I can't have the best of all of the different criteria. I have to choose the criteria that I'm willing to sacrifice for the things that I want. And that's exactly where we're at with politics. in politics, we are suffering in the same situation. It is a politician's market, not a voter's market.
No.
And if we can change that to be a voter's market where the politicians that are on offer are all more
Can you
closely
leave
related to
her
what voters
on the
want,
TV?
then the
Put it
character
in the vacuum,
of the person who's representing us is going to be much more important, I think.
I 100% like agree with you, because here's the reason why. The voters don't pick the candidates. The parties do. That right there is a problem. That right now, because now you're telling me who to vote for.
What?
If
Okay.
okay,
When
so
is
here's an example. Bernie, we'll take Bernie for a good example. Bernie was doing really well in the polls. Like, a lot of people really did like him. He was actually ahead of Hillary at one point. And then they asked him to step back and give the nomination to Hillary. I wanted Bernie. I don't want Hillary. So why am I being told that the only person that I have to vote for is Trump or Hillary or Trump or Biden?
Oh, okay.
I abstained in 2016 for this very reason.
Okay.
I voted for Johnson.
This whole premise of it's a politician's market, that's fascism. When do voters not matter? And in your scenario, Steve, what stopped voters from voting for Bernie?
Burner. Sorry, what?
Bernie.
I got
what
caught.
Stopped voters from
Burner Boy is a Nigerian musician.
My point is that it's always a voter's market, and when it's not, then it's not democracy anymore.
Exactly. If it was a voter market,
I don't agree that asking Bernie to step back, that's a party decision, and I agree that's a little hinky. But voters, they didn't tell voters who to vote for.
Well, here's the thing. If you don't want to tell voters who to vote for, have multiple candidates, not just one.
Both sides.
Do you remember back in the day where there was like a panel of 6? Right. You could have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans working. Right. So by removing those other alternatives and only giving me 2 choices, you're telling me who to vote for. You're just giving me 1 or 2. And that's my argument. I think that's Ben's argument. If I'm understanding him correctly.
But ranked choice voting, to me, it is more head to head.
I like the idea of changing our system to one that incorporates runoffs and ranks, because then again, it's not that it would change the way that the market, again, going back to my kind of, and I will say that wasn't a very strongly thought out simile either. That was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. So there's going to be a lot of issues with me comparing the housing market to political voting. But I think that what you're talking about, creating a ranked runoff kind of a situation would mean that people were able to vote more frequently and ultimately kind of matriculate someone who has more of the desirable characteristics of more of the people to the top. And that is what we would want, even if Bernie in that scenario or Trump even would not be able to win in that environment. At least we would get higher quality candidates up to the top, and more people would be incentivized to run, I think, as well, because then it's not like, well, it's all a winner takes all slugfest. There's political hay to be made in that process, more so, I would think, than in the current process that we have.
Well, let me put a caveat on that. Ranked choice voting works in primaries and maybe, combining primaries. But I think that in the end, even with ranked choice voting, you're going to have one-on-one. Mm-hmm. So in the end, You're not going to have ranked choice. You're going to have one-on-one. It's just their preliminaries, like I don't know, like the NCAA's, round of 16, 8, 4, 2. And I hope every state starts doing that. It's essentially a runoff until the final election.
So let me add a perspective here. Is that I can't remember where it was or when it was, and I can't pull it up right at the moment. But there was a rule that was made, and both Democrats and Republicans both agreed to this rule, which is if you don't have 5% of the voting population's support, you don't get to be a part of the debates. This is another aspect of the you will vote for one of these two people because we tell you to kind of aspect to American politics that I wholeheartedly disagree with.
You might have a point, but let me ask you a quick question. I think you're right. However, who was it? One of the parties had like 2 different nights of debate, so there was never truly head to head. And I think, it was kind of an aberration over the past, 2 or 3 election cycles where you had like 20 candidates running for president, for the nomination. There comes a point in time where you don't want 20 people on a stage because no one gets enough time. That is an invitation for soundbite politics.
Sure, I agree with that. I would like to see it at a minimum 4. I'd even take Brett Weinstein's unity perspective, where perhaps we need to have 2 presidents in office. It's fully constitutional.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Well,
I mean,
wasn't it the case back in the day that when people ran off against each other, eventually the 2 top people were essentially going for the presidency versus the vice presidency, and they would both be in office?
No,
I think that.
Essentially,
Am I misunderstanding it, Stanley?
The second place winner would be vice president.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. But no, Brett Weinstein's perspective was that it is possible to have 2 presidents. There's nothing in the Constitution that says we can't, is their perspective. My perspective is I would like to see people running for president, and whoever loses gains vice presidency. That, I think, would be interesting. But not doing that isn't really producing the same results. I mean, it's not doing that is producing the same results that we can continue to complain
What powers does the vice president have anyway?
Not much, to be honest.
Oh.
But it is representative.
It is representative. It is kind of a figurehead position.
Well, it depends. I mean, if there is a tied Senate, having the deciding vote is very powerful. Being in the, presidents do die occasionally. So, and then you have someone, I think Joe, definitely, what's his name? Halliburton dude.
Cheney.
He had immense power.
Yeah. Well, they actually changed the way that the presidency was actually used. Like, I can't remember the name of it, but if you go back and you watch the movie Cheney with the guy that played Batman, what's his name? Christian Bale. They actually explain it really, really well that Cheney and Bush changed the entire way the presidency was actually used. Cheney was incredibly powerful in office. He was over the military. Bush gave him power over the military. Which is well within the constitutional rights of the president to do. And it created a very powerful presidency. Like Bush was the last president. Well, actually, Obama was the last president that was voted in 2 terms. We'll see if Biden is or not. But the Bush presidency was extremely powerful with the diversification of power in the presidency.
Yeah, that's
all right, guys. I think maybe we have to draw this
Yeah,
stream
it's
for close. I gotta go to bed,
2:30, huh?
and maybe we can continue in the Discord if we want to take the conversation further too.
Ben,
I'm
So
down.
we should hop on the Discord. I haven't talked to you in a while.
yeah,
Yeah.
so let's take it to Discord. So guys, thank you very much for coming to the stream. Appreciate your voices, Stanley, Steve, Ben, and even Mark. Finally, Mark was able to join us, and I hope he'll be able to join us going forward. And thank everyone who came to the stream. Work, Arnold, Anan. Um, I haven't seen Melinda and Christina Bang, my two favorite people. I haven't seen them in the last two streams. I hope they're all
What
right.
has Chloe
I
gotten
love
on?
seeing GOJ. GOJ is a
Yeah,
good guy to
yeah,
have
yeah.
around.
GOJ too. Thank you, GOJ. So I'll catch you guys in another live stream. So it
Charles,
would be
I'll
bye
talk
for
to
now.
you. GOJ should join your server.
Yeah, GOJ, please join the Discord. The link to the Discord is in the chat and also in the description of the video, so you can join the Discord. So guys, we'll see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.
Thanks,
Enjoyed
Charles.
it.
Good to talk with
Extreme
all of you guys.
libertarianism.
I'll see you guys in Discord.